Don't know much about history, don't know much biology, don't know much about a science book, don't know much about the French I took.
Hello dear YouTubers, subscribers of me, flat earthers. Sometimes people throw dust in your eyes. They try to mislead you, and flat darts are very good at that. And one of the things is their whole presentation of Operation Fishbowl. So I have here a bowl construction, and where we can see a red ball somewhere on top of it, but I can't grab it somehow. It is not there. And the reason is, if I lift this, you will see that the ball is actually not there, but below there. See? And now it pops up above. And this is a form of deception. It's a form of hologram, whatever. And that's what Operation Fishbowl flat dart videos are all about. They claim that the government at one point in time tried to punch a hole in the dome, in the God-created firmament in the dome. And actually that is all bullshit. It had a purpose, and the results of these tests of Operation Fishbowl were part of the work I later had to do. The information that came from it was something I had to deal with as an engineer. And I would be happy to share with you what Operation Fishbowl was, how flat darts tried to mislead you, and give you some background information. I hope you're going to like this video.
Today's increasing international emphasis on long-range ballistic missile activity raises to priority attention the mastering of high-altitude burst effects phenomenology. At stake are urgent problems, such as those associated with ICBM defense, as well as the upper air burst effects on radio communications and radar. On hardtack, 3 high-altitude shots were fired to acquire data necessary to develop a national capability for high-altitude warfare. Yucca, a 1.7 kiloton device suspended from a balloon, and Teak and Orange, both 3.8 megaton devices carried by Redstone missiles. All were fired to obtain effects data for the fulfillment of 3 general objectives. First, to find out how extreme altitudes affect the partition of energy in a nuclear detonation, and what is the radial extent of the various phenomena. Second, to determine scaling laws for various effects as a function of altitude and yield. Third, to determine the effects of high-altitude bursts on the ionosphere and on the propagation of radio and radar signals. A brief recapitulation of the findings in line with the general objectives sought from Teak, Orange, and Yucca shows first that high-altitude nuclear detonations are characterized by the rapid development of energy phenomena.
Just amazing, isn't it? That they now talk about 35 failed attempts and they could not penetrate the barrier above us. This is so incredibly stupid, because the highest explosion of the 3, there were only 3 high altitude explosions of the 35, was only at 75 kilometers. So the test cycle in the end of the 50s under the codename Hardtack were an overall set of nuclear tests, and only 3 were high altitude. It was later in 1962 that Operation Fishbowl came to action, and they did tests at 200, 400 and was high. which is substantially higher. And that already completely debunks this video of our flat earth friends. So they lie. About 35 failed attempts, where there were only 3 high altitudes, and the high altitudes were not high enough to even come close to the dome. Neither are the attacks or the attempts and tests done by Fishbowl. So as you can see, there are many other videos where they then take the right operation, at least the somewhat higher explosions that were done during Operation Fishbowl in 1962. Almost every Flat Earth channel has an opinion about it, and they're all dead wrong, of course. Let's just pick one.
They called it Operation Fishbowl, and it was to shoot missiles into space because they thought they had the power to finally break through the firmament. And actually what happens, if you read the rest of the article, these missiles would hit up at a certain altitude, and then light would shine all the way to the other hemisphere. And the reason that was is because they were hitting that glass, and the glass was reflecting it all the way across the sky. It's not some globe Earth where they're just trying. Why would they just shoot a missile in the air to see how high it can blow up?
So, he's just shown ground explosions, which is pretty stupid. Is of course the Great Harvest Church. Now, then you already know that they're a bunch of fucking liars as well. Apparently, the sun, let's look at this little transistor, we're going to use that later, is the sun is turning around above this Earth. About 3,000 miles, 5,000 kilometers, and the tests were done at the highest test was done around 400 kilometers, which is the thickness of this screwdriver. So at that altitude is where they did the tests. So you can understand that it's way below the sun, but the sun is still inside the dome, and actually the dome is probably this high. It would form like that. And that means that if your nuclear explosions are that high, you're not shooting at the dome. It is just a freaking silly argument. And basically they make themselves look like the absolute fools. If the explosions are even below the sun, it's obvious they were not aiming at the dome. If there was a dome at all. But just to show that if they had given it 2 seconds of thought, they would never have come up with that argument. But Fishbowl had its purpose, and let's look at that. What was it that caused that people discovered later the effects of nuclear explosions? Of course, they had been testing in Nevada before they did the attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But in those days, if they had any radio equipment, communication equipment, maybe a simple computer, they would be using valves, radio valves or vacuum tubes or whatever you want to call them. And they have one big advantage. If there is somewhere a lightning stroke or a nuclear electromagnetic pulse, it might cause for a millisecond an extra current going through these coils that heat up this vacuum tube, and it would cause a click or a little sound or whatever, but it would not destroy it because it is so short that, and the thing is already warm, it would become in a millisecond just a little bit warmer, dissipate its energy and survive any nuclear blast, any electromagnetic pulse, any electromagnetic surge. So But of course we went over to the era of radios. The first radios were the so-called 8 transistor radio. And here I have, you already see how small it is, a metal capped transistor, which does the same thing. It can amplify signals or switch signals. And that is the first basis to work toward computers. Later we had the fully plastic transistors. With 8 of those you could build a radio, a receiver that also would amplify the received signals toward a loudspeaker. But with transistors you can also build computers. And in the early days the first computers had of course a lot of transistors. Now the main problem here is that they can actually fry. If you would now have a huge electromagnetic pulse going into that little bit of silicon that is in there, you can actually destroy it. And that is what they found happened. And that was one of the reasons to do all the tests to figure out how big is a nuclear electromagnetic pulse, how far does it reach, how does it spread, what are the electromagnetic fields we have to take care of, and that became very important. So at one moment in time we managed to make the transistor even smaller. Actually so small that every little square you see here, and I'm not sure if the camera is picking it up and really do that. But every little square now contains a couple of 100,000 of transistors. And what would happen, the square would be cut out and then end up, for instance, as you see here, in a chip. Now this is a particularly military chip. It is not made out of plastic. The chip is mounted within a gold environment. All the connections are made to the outside to all the gold plated connectors, and the material is ceramics, which makes it strong, very well protected against heat. And this particular one is a LPC10, a linear predictive coding voice coder, as used in military telephones. And the telephones we built to help bring down the German wall. But that is a different story. But our company had a major role in that. So this type of chip, with a different chip in there, but the rest is the same, was also a design we had inside the device I made, and I will show you later, that I needed to protect against the nuclear electromagnetic pulse. You can imagine that this thing, so big, can handle the power of a pulse. Much less can a transistor, but that thing, with hundreds of thousands of transistors on the few square millimeters we have there, would absolutely fry if we would not protect the device from the outside, so that the effects of a nuclear electromagnetic pulse or lightning, if you have a field telephone or other field communications out there and the military is using it, you can run into a simple rainstorm with lightning, and lightning causes the same effects when it hits your antenna as a nuclear electromagnetic pulse does. So we needed to protect against that, and Operation Fishbowl was at the basis giving us the data we needed to calculate what the effects could be, and then make our protection, and then have also a set of parameters that we could use to do the testing. And the testing was done in the Netherlands at TNO laboratories in the dunes, where they had built this huge antenna, and they could pump up thousands, hundreds of thousands of volts, which they would discharge over this antenna, and below the antenna would be the object under test that would then be in a electromagnetic field, which is the same as a nuclear explosion at 400 kilometers altitude. Here's a picture of the test site as it was in those days. So the TNO FEL, the location formerly known as the EMP site, where magnetic pulse experiments were carried out. So you have wires here on the ground as well. That's Earth, and over here were hundreds of thousands of volts, and the device would be put here on the ground, and a discharge would then take care of a huge electromagnetic pulse.
Koninklijke Landmacht. Belangrijk werk. De tijd van je leven.
So, despite the good work also the US Army does worldwide in maintaining and keeping the peace, the Army Signal Corps was the backbone of the communications of the United States Army. Just an anecdote, when the system I worked on, and the telephone you see, and the switches, and the 2 megabit link communication protection devices we built, when the project became live in 1987, 1988, everybody within the NATO was talking about the Zodiac effect. That was the code name, the project name of the whole project, which was not only secure communications between the mobile telephone switches, but also the end-to-end secure communication via the telephone I developed. So the Zodiac effect was seen as the following. When there was an exercise in Germany, the Americans, the British, the Germans would be there 2 or 1 week before the exercise started. They would lay out their communication lines, set up their troposcatters and whatever you have to make connections, and there would not be a single Dutch soldier inside. Inside, you know, like we could not see. Nobody saw any Dutch soldier. And one day before the exercise started, the trucks would appear. The Dutch would drive to their locations, put up the antennas, and be online within 24 hours, where the other armies needed 1 to 2 weeks. That effect, the Zodiac effect, maintained over 8 years, until the others were on par with what we had developed. So, there it is. 10 kilos of telephone. And this one designed to withstand lightning, on its two communication wires on that side, and of course on all connectors, power supply, and here peripheral equipment like fax, notebooks, computers. It can encrypt it and transmit it as well. So let's open it up and have a quick look at the provisions made to protect the electronics inside. So there are quite a lot of screws to unscrew, and that's simply because if you want to protect something against emanation, radiation, etc. from the outside, you really want to close it up, because every little small opening could bring harmful information, or radiation or emanation to the inside. But as it is a encryption device, it is required to keep you safe. Whatever you say must be kept safe, and that means also nothing may leak out, so that spies or whatever cannot intercept your messages. Right, and the last one on this side of right here. Also interesting to see is you see all the compartments are all separated and all interconnected by filters, and the rubber here that is intended to not only make it watertight, also contains a sort of silver pearls that conduct electricity, so to get a very good electrical contact between the covers and the housing. Let's have a look on the other table on what we see here. Right, so here it is. Just to show a little bit, this is the electronics inside. So the voice coding, the microcontroller, the encryption card, the alarm handling, etc. Here spots for memory, and this one, I will take this one out for a second. It's unique, and in those days that would cost 10,000 guilders, $5,000, a 1 megabit memory. Just imagine 1 megabit only. And it's difficult to say, but in here is a magnetic bubble memory, and it works based on having a ceramic layer where you can create magnetic bubbles with two heavy permanent magnets on both sides, and then with coils you can make the bubble move over the ceramic surface, and then with a reader detector like we see now on a hard drive, you could then read the bubbles that pass by, and in that way put information on it or read information of it. 10,000 guilders, $5,000, just this. And that was purchase price, so bill of material, and before it was mounted in here. Already separated from the rest is a line interface that goes to the terminals on the outside, where you have the line, the field line that goes to the switch, and a hidden switch which will kill all secrets inside the moment you release the cover. So now here I'm not going to screw this loose, but you can already see it's a separate compartment, like you have a separate compartment here, here and here. This is the power supply, which has surge arresters, everything on the first PCB. For the line we have here surge arresters, so as soon as a too high voltage arrives on these wires, it will short circuit them to the housing, to the ground. Every line that goes from one compartment to the other will pass through filters. Here you have a full block with filters and all kinds of little ferrite beads that go around every pin. Everything is made to keep any transient away from the inside of this telephone. You can imagine that with this type of chips we are dealing with stuff that is very sensitive. I have protected it so that you can actually touch it. Normally you would have to secure yourself, ground yourself, so it is resistant against that as well. But all chips, even the simple switching electronics for the digital processing, are all in ceramics. One of the demands of this device was that it should survive operating at -40 up to +85 degrees Celsius. And I'll put some pictures, I'll show you some pictures later on where the device is in a water test, in a freezer. But that's what it's all about. You could simply make some electronics, put a line to the outside and you're done. But what we learned from fishbowl is that lightning and nuclear electromagnetic pulses can actually destroy electronics in a really severe matter. And that is why all the pens here, which is what some people remember as an RS-232 interface computers used to have. Well, half of them is that plus some additional interfaces. Every line goes here to surge arresters, transient suppressors and filters, and then into the rest of the device. And at the test we did at FEL TNO, they measured on the line and on some of the points here currents of 3000 amps that were diverted by the surge arresters to the ground, protecting the inner side of the telephone. It went almost 110%. There was a little tenth of a percent, you could say, which was a fail because the device did reset. So it switched off and on automatically by itself. But for the rest, it passed all the tests. So I hope you have an idea now of this type of work I did when I just came out of school. Because this was the first project I worked on in my life. The telephone in the end cost 40,000 guilders, $70,000. And this one is a Tempest device, so that means it was used to test and check if it was actually secure, tested by the NSA in the United States, for which I went over and was probably... I hope it gives you a little bit of an impression. If there is interest, leave it in the comments, then I could maybe unscrew that to show what is in there, but basically it's a lot of this there for every pin. I could also make a video more on the bubble memory if people would actually be interested in that. But this is also a nice example. If we had to make this again today, like if we had to do an Apollo program today, we couldn't. And that's not because we don't have the technology. No, we have the technology to put most of that in this. But this one is not EMP and lightning protected, and this one is. But things like the bubble memory are no longer produced. There is nobody, no company in the world who knows how to do that anymore. Even all the diagrams and all the papers of this telephone are gone. You know, the company was sold, information was scattered, and because they were not producing it anymore, they threw away the schematics and everything. That's how life goes. So also using it as an argument that Apollo never happened because they can't rebuild it anymore. It's simple the effect of advancement in technology. We can't build things the old way anymore, and if we build it the new way, we will have to test it. If I want to make sure if this can handle a nuclear electromagnetic pulse, which it probably can't, I will have to submit it to the tests this phone had. So I hope I explained a little bit that the whole fishbowl idea is bogus. It had a purpose. One of the purposes gives data so that we could develop protection for this type of devices. And the other thing is, none of those experiments, none of the explosions in fishbowl or head track were high enough to even, if there was a dome, to even come close to the dome. It's not even like 5% of the distance covered. So it is a clear attempt by flat-tards to confuse people, to be dishonest, to be intellectually dishonest. Don't forget to sub. Thank you very much for watching. I have to screw it back together. So, if you would like some additional information about this telephone, people from the Crypto Museum at cryptomuseum.com visited me at home and made pictures, and we opened it up, and they have tons of information about it, which partly I gave them, but they also got it from other sources, and it's very interesting to have a look at. Here you see the telephone in the cooling. You see the ice on it. You see the water test. So that gives you some information. As I said, pictures of the interior, of the encryption board, and of every board is photographed here, and you can get the information. The bubble memory we disassembled so that you can actually see it. The crypto board was disassembled, so you can see it here at the bottom of the page. And last but not least, very funny, is a lookalike, and what the museum tells you here is that approximately 10 years after the conception of the Spandex 50, the US Army and US Navy introduced a similar device with nearly identical specifications, the Key Y68 digital subscriber voice terminal. So we, with a company of a couple of hundred people, but a department of 20 people working on all kinds of encryption devices, were almost 10 years ahead of the USA, and that still makes me proud. So this was some additional information. Really, go to the cryptomuseum.com Spandex 50 and you will get all the additional information that I left out on what the device does and is able to do. Again, thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't, and click on the little bell so that you get the automatic updates. Thank you all.